this way. They're buried through this area, right through here. The little girl who died of diphtheria, the first burial, is right there by the tree on the corner. The story that Dominica put in the paper, she married Sebastian Garibaldi, which was the son of the original Italian farmers who came over here. She tells the story of the Great Storm. She wasn't born yet. Her mother tells that they lived in a little shack. They hadn't been here long. They'd been in Texas for a very short time. And, you know, the wind started blowing and the water rose, and they didn't have the same kinds of reports that we have today to keep them up to date. Well, their house, their little shack, is what she called it, blew down. So they started heading for safer ground and couldn't get there. The wind was blowing so hard. They had a little girl, and they had a 19-month-old boy, and Mom was carrying the boy. They could find no shelter to go to in the blowing winds of the night. So they clung to the trees. And in the course of the rain and the waves coming in, the water coming in, the little boy started crying. And as he cried, that opened his mouth to the elements, and he began to swallow the salt water and the rain. And he drowned as the mother was holding him. She held him tightly all night long, clinging to the trees. And in the morning, when they found them, their clothes had been ripped off. Their skin was shredded by basically shrapnel, the debris that was blowing through the air. And they had long hair, and their hair had been pulled out because it had been whipped by the wind so much. Their animals survived. They had a dog and a horse that survived. And apparently, the dog had clung to the horse's area during the storm, and either climbed up on the horse's back to escape the water, or had jumped in his feed box. Because after the storm, the dog was inseparable from the horse. Could not be separated. He would snap at you if you tried to move him and bark at you. When they took their vegetables to market, the horse pulled the wagon. The dog was in the wagon. So the Gherardis brought their family from Italy in the late 1800s. They had 8 children. I just want to read you the dates on here and see if you notice a pattern. Sebastian, the oldest, was born in 1896, was born in 1893, and died in 1890. Wait a minute, let me back up. Joanna was the first one. There are 2 Joannas. Joanna was born in 93. She died in 96, 18. Sebastian, the husband of Dominica, was born in 94. He died in 1974. George was born in 1898. He was swept overboard in heavy seas during World War I. Louis was born in 1897. He died in 1898. Another Joanna was born in 1900. In February, died in May of 1900. Frank, there's some discrepancy on his dates. The materials I have said he was born in 1900. Others say late 1800s. He died in 1907. Mike was born in 1902 and died in the Texas City disaster in 1947. Margaret Mary is born in 1903, and died in 1974. And after all, you see all the babies, right? Okay, that's before 1904, right? Their mother Marie died in 1904 and left. There's a sad picture of John with his 5 motherless children that actually made the newspapers at the time. So that's the Gherardi family. You know the Gherardi oak they've been talking about in Lake City, that the road with, this is this family. And that was their home place right there. You know, thanks to the protests of the Girl Scouts and the citizens groups, the Historical Association, it's been saved. They're going to move it somewhere. But you ever seen the commercial on TV for Gay Pontiac? Okay, you know the lady, the grandma that's on there? She's a Gherardi. She's one of the children. And that's her that you see. So that's the Gherardi and the Filippa family. And we're going to head, you see the one with the medallion right over there? This is Private Leslie Bryan Scott. He, as you notice, someone's visited and left a rock. It's the Jewish tradition to leave a rock because of the closeness that you leave flowers, they die, they think this lasts forever. So so they leave a rock there. There's another tradition that escapes my mind at the time. He was almost 20 when World War I came around, and before the call for troops, he joined the Marines. He was the only League City resident to join the Marines. He was wounded in France, and as he was recovering, he would send home letters about the fierce fighting his people had been involved with. He was sent back into battle about 2 or 3 months later after he healed, and took a direct hit with shrapnel in his shoulder, took off most of this part of his body, and he died. He was buried in France for a while until the war was over, and then they began to bring him back. His father died about 2 months before they actually could bring him back. But this was League City's only son to actually die in battle. There were 3 who died. One was swept overboard. You saw him back there. One died for other reasons. And he was the only one to actually die for battle, so they wanted to honor him properly. And it was the biggest funeral that League City had seen in a driving, blinding rainstorm. Little St. Mary's Church that's down here on Main Street near the railroad or the railroad track, that was the site of it. There were flowers everywhere. There were flags and bunting, and his Marine buddies were there. People were outside the church in the driving rain, and it was the largest funeral that League City had seen. And this was their son, World War I, the only one to die in actual battle in World War I. So, like I said, his father, who was a judge, the funeral was even much bigger than his father's, who had died a couple of months before that. So we're going to, I wanted to tell you just briefly, the way that most of this information came about. Someone was asking me, can you buy plots here still? The material, they don't know who's buried where anymore, because the information they got from what Catherine was telling me is they just got these receipts and these little snips of paper that were in boxes, and they just had to kind of figure out who's where. And just when they think that there's an empty spot, they tried to sell one, and then they had to do the iron to see if there was anything there. And sure enough, somebody was there. So there are a lot of unmarked graves here. Okay, we're going. Okay, this is really the story of Marcus Benson. But he was involved with Perry Henry McFadden. He was involved with J.E. Hayes. It's down this way. And he was involved, remember the little beautiful monument with the horse that on slides? With Hayden Ross. And Hayden's name is spelled H-A-D-E-N in the newspaper accounts. But in the early 1900s, there was a range war going on. And the only fences that you saw in League City were to keep the cattle out of your house. So there was a big deal. Do I fence? Do I not fence? And there was the cattlemen had lots of arguments over it. Well, apparently Marcus Benson was for fencing and started fencing off his land, which really ticked off the McFaddens and the Hayes family. So Grover Benson, the brother of Marcus, was kind of kidnapped from his house one night, taken out and beaten up royally, and they're guessing who it was. Well, that caused lots of bad blood, even more. Along came Marcus, and Marcus had been out of town during all of this, and as he rode back in one morning, he was in what's 2nd Street now, but it was really the main street then. Someone mentioned Butler Courtyard to me earlier. Some of you know about Butler Courtyard, where they do the weddings and the receptions and things. That was actually a 2-story building, and it was the bank, and there was a store and different things there. And the uncle of the Bensons was getting ready to go into town, and he was told, "Don't go in right now. We saw men in the upstairs windows of the bank with guns, and there may be trouble, so don't go in." There was a guy who was sitting on the porch with his feet up, like in the cowboy movies, and he saw things kind of boiling and went back inside. So there was really nobody in the street at the time except for good old Marcus on his horse coming down the street. Well, their shots rang out, and he was hit, and he stayed on the horse and grabbed the saddle, and the horse ran toward the railroad tracks. He fell off about where the railroad tracks are today, and died. His uncle had no idea that that's what the trouble was that was going to happen. Well, they didn't really have witnesses. Everybody only heard it. Nobody saw it. The only thing they did see was McFadden and Hayes heading out the back of the bank with shotgun and rifle. And shortly thereafter, about an hour later, the sheriff got a call that was told that McFadden wanted to see him, and they were at the home of Hayden Ross. So he went there. All three men were there, and the sheriff asked Perry McFadden. He said, "I guess I want you," and Perry McFadden said, "I guess so." And he asked the same thing to Hayes, same answer. And then Hayden Ross stepped up and said, "I guess you want me too." So all three of them were put into jail, and there was a giant trial. They pled not guilty and were acquitted. So the three of them are buried here in various places. Hayden Ross is buried in the freeway, and his namesake school is not too far away. So we're going to kind of skip down